I'm sure Spelljammer is a term you've heard a lot recently if you're involved in any of the D&D community, and you might be wondering why. You may be one of the older school players who recognizes this and is very excited, or you've heard about it but you don't really know a lot about it. But the point is, a lot of people seem to be very excited because recently Wizards of the Coast actually announced some official material for it is going to be coming out soon, and it's got a lot of people excited. But I'm very curious as to why, and why Spelljammer specifically has so many people hyped, and what we can learn from it. So let's talk about that. So, Spelljammer. Spelljammer is a setting that was released 32 years ago at this point, in 1989, and that may not seem like such a big deal. I mean, how many settings do we have currently in 5th edition that have been released forever ago and have just stood the test of time? So why should Spelljammer be any different, and why is it a big deal? Well, here's something you may not know. Spelljammer has not received any substantial updates or information for over 28 years now. It only lasted a few years. It received a few different supplements, a few releases, and after that, basically nothing. There was a little tidbit here and there, but for the most part, there was no official source books or any sort of supplement coming out for this setting. And yet, people seem to be making a big deal about Spelljammer. And in fact, even before this happened and there was announcements made, or even the Unearthed Arcana last year, I still knew about Spelljammer despite the fact that I was only playing 5th edition. Everybody seemed to know about it, even though it was not released and wasn't played that much. So why is Spelljammer so important to everybody? And what is it? For those of you who don't know, Spelljammer is essentially D&D in space, and that's not just me summarizing it down or making it incredibly simple. I'm not kidding, that's literally how it was advertised a lot of the time. And it wasn't a science fiction adventure. It wasn't science fiction settings, but you know, it used the D system and rules. No, it literally was Dungeons & Dragons in space.
D&D. Adventure! It's an adventure in space!
Everything was fantasy. They used magic to propel themselves through the stars, magic to sail everywhere, and it literally was just that. It was a strange thing because it mixed the adventures of traveling through the stars with the adventures of things like Jules Verne, making this nautical spacefaring adventure, and that's incredibly evocative, and I think that's a large portion of why it's considered so largely to be this, well, very staple of D&D, despite the fact that it's really not. And so if you look at the setting itself, it really speaks for things that it has had so little material, but it is stuck so firmly in so many people's minds. See, here's the deal. Spelljammer is a setting where you can use magic to traverse the stars. You sail on boats called Spelljammers, hence the name, and you get to explore this incredible area on the astral sea. You get to go from planet to planet, you get to explore and see incredible creatures, beholders the size of comets and dragons the size of worlds. But the thing that I really want to focus on is what it was that made this setting so important to so many people. Because there's this thing in the D&D community where there's a little bit of division between rough, rugged, dark fantasy and high fantasy, low magic settings and high magic settings, grimdark and fantastical. And it's a reason why that is. People like to run different adventures, and yet Spelljammer seems to avoid a lot of this criticism. Not all of it. There are critics of it out there, and that's totally understandable. But most of the people, even the ones who don't like high fantasy, seem to look at Spelljammer and understand that it's its own thing. You can't really compare this as a high fantasy setting because it's just so unique, and that's the thing I really want to get at. The reason that so many people have a problem with high fantasy is they don't consider the consequences of high fantasy. If you have that much magic in your world, it's gonna be a big deal, and it's going to change everything. It's gonna change the laws of physics, how people react to things. It's kind of silly sometimes in D&D games, don't you think? That people can literally learn cantrips, just your average commoner, and cantrips aren't one of the most core fundamental things of life. I mean, wouldn't you think that they would be? Wouldn't you think that that would be one of the most important things? Because magic is accessible to everybody, which is essentially the same, if you think about it, as being able to create amazing pieces of technology in your own home. And that's what really sets this apart, because Spelljammer considers the consequences of those things. It understands and it creates this entire world based around high fantasy magic. You literally fly on ships that are powered by magic through a magical sea. In the old editions of Spelljammer, and I think that they're removing this in the newer editions, but they literally had it so that what you sailed through in the Spelljammer campaigns was so powerful and flammable that if you cast a fire spell, you would immediately cause an explosion centered on yourself. That is so fun and really focuses on what happens if you're in a world of tons of magic. And that's what makes Spelljammer different and why it's set in so many people's heads, because it took the concept of magic seriously. And I really think that's something that we can learn very well in our own games, because if we actually take the concept of magic seriously, we can world build in such a more creative and incredible fashion. Let me give you some examples.
But first, a word from our sponsor.
Man, it's so hard to find the time and inspiration to make good encounters for my campaign.
You don't have to.
What? Why are you skateboarding in my house?
This is the deck of stories.
It's a totally tubular system that lets you make encounters on the spot. Just draw your cards and use the Auric system. O means it's the start of the encounter, R means the middle, and C is the climax.
And right now they have booster decks, and they're doing a flash sale so that you can actually get good.
For limited time, booster decks are on sale for $5. You can grab them to get additional resources such as the NPC cards, which come with a fully fleshed out NPC on each one. Links in the description for this incredibly radical product. God, I hate myself.
When looking at Spelljammer, there's one thing you can immediately notice, and it's the concept that it is taking itself seriously enough to actually have some fun, but not taking itself so seriously that it gets too grounded in reality. Here's what I mean. Spelljammer has a lot of different ways of interacting with its magic and treating it as if it was real in the world, while still letting that take it to some crazy places. Spelljammer allows you to take these boats, called Spelljammers, as mentioned previously, and travel through what is essentially different universes. The concept is that each D&D universe that we know of is trapped in this bubble, and they're put in this large field of strange liquid that can be flammable when you touch it. And that's such an interesting, fascinating, and incredible concept, but it's also so insane. But when you think about it in a world of magic, it makes perfect sense. Because if people really had access to magic, and there really were so many individuals obsessed with learning magic as D&D leads us to believe, then wouldn't people have figured out how to escape their own universes at this point? If there really were such a concept out there, wouldn't magic have allowed you to do that? And that's what I mean by Spelljammer taking itself seriously enough to actually treat magic as real, without letting itself get bogged down. See, Spelljammer has all these very fun and amazing rules that are weird takes on the type of actual science that we know. Gravity for them is just the concept of something giving a pull in the most convenient fashion, meaning that if you're on a boat, you can literally walk onto the other side of the boat and just be hanging upside down because gravity is just going to pull you to the most convenient location that is near you. And this also means that these strange Spelljammers can go into different worlds, and the gravity is strong enough to create bubbles of air around them so that they can refuel and continue on their way. That makes perfect sense in a magic setting, even though it's total nonsense. And there's a very fine line with letting yourself have that fun stuff while still making sure that your world treats magic as if it is a true force in front of you. And that's really what I think Spelljammer has done to be so influential to so many people. Yes, it does play on the science fiction and the nostalgia and all of that great stuff, but at the same time, what else does it do? It just really lets you enjoy that experience. It lets you have fun, feeling like you can be in that area and enjoy magic and enjoy the ridiculous fantasy of it while the world itself takes it seriously. So you don't have to struggle so much to suspend your disbelief. Because it's so hard looking at some D&D settings and actually thinking that people would act the way that they do. Yes, there are archmages everywhere that can literally change and warp reality. But you know what? Yeah, famine is sure a thing because they just haven't used magic to fix that at this point. You see what I mean? And I think that's really why so many people like the gritty, grimdark, and low fantasy settings, because it makes it so much easier to not have to consider the implications of magic. But when you have a high fantasy magic setting, your only option truly is to take it seriously and let it take you to the insane places it might. Otherwise, the world is gonna feel a little bit contrived and, well, samey. And I think that's why so many people don't like high fantasy settings. But I think there's so much potential there that is being missed if you're not doing that. So what can we learn from Spelljammer? There's just so much to learn. But the main point of it is, it's been important in people's lives, and it has been such a visceral part of the community despite having hardly any actual official releases, because it takes itself seriously enough to be ridiculous. And I think that's something we could all learn.
This video wouldn't be possible without the incredible beautiful bastards over on our Patreon. I'd like to give an additional very personal thank you to the Divine Bastards Big D the Cool Guy, BKBW, Clark Smith, Diet Blue, Duplicolor, Manifestoring, Rocky, Sassy Cat Productions, Sorit, Supreme Court, Talia Martin, Tin Eye, Void Mystic, Volpe Nico, and Zombies Were People Too. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without you guys, and you mean the absolute world to us. Keep being beautiful, keep being amazing, and as always, make the world your own.